That's what their manifesto is. What do you hope to achieve if you succeed?
So I've looked at the Constitution and the statutes around the role of Chancellor, and it is not purely a ceremonial role. You do actually have duties as part of the member of the council, of the executive, and to make sure that the universities, executives and officers are performing their duties in a proper way. So if it was purely ceremonial, I wouldn't have been interested in it. But what I have been spending my time doing is talking to different stakeholders at the university. And there is dissatisfaction around the way the finances of the university are being run. For example, in 2023-24, they had a £53 million deficit and are on course this year to have a £47 million deficit. And the Board of Scrutiny there has found that there's no reason for it and they actually can't identify it. So there needs to be improvement in governance, in transparency, and that also applies when it comes to bullying and sexism and the well-being of staff and members of the student body. And finally, there's a lot of dissatisfaction around the austerity that's being proposed by the university. I mean, I'm not a fan of austerity in any sector. I think you have to invest to get into a better place in the future. And I think the austerity, the threat of the 5% across the board, is something that the university should be dissuaded from doing and instead look to fund and attract talent around the world. You know, have instead a talent magnet fund, for example, for disaffected academics and students due to the Trump administration and elsewhere in the world.
And both Lord Smith and Lord Brown talked about a sort of crisis for our universities. Do you share with them not just the specifics about Cambridge's deficit, but this unusual situation I think we find ourselves in where the government, particularly this kind of immigration policy that both governments seem to adopt, Conservative and Labour, being against immigration, wanting to restrict student numbers. Is that a challenge for Cambridge?
It's a challenge for Cambridge and the entire university sector. Prior to even considering this chancellorship, I've always felt that the foreign student figures numbers should not be in immigration figures, because they actually are a net benefit to our economy, to, billions. So the fact that it's in the immigration figures, I've never understood why it's there. So this has been long before that I felt that. But there is a huge undervaluing of what universities and the higher education sector brings to us in both hard economic terms, but also soft power. If we train people from around the world, then they go back, they take our culture, they take an understanding of the UK. And I think that's really undervalued. So there's a lot of work to be done to persuade politicians, I think, that it's a sector that we need more than ever, not least because of the challenges we're facing in the world. We need to have the brightest innovators and thinkers, and we need to be supporting them, not closing them down.
And forgive my ignorance, I assume you were at Cambridge as an
No, this is what's quite amazing.
No, are you the only candidate who wasn't at Cambridge?
I am the only candidate, I believe, that wasn't at Cambridge. But also, when I was approached in February to stand, I thought, this is rather odd. So I was approached by a group of professors. And so I looked into the Constitution. And you can stand if you're not. It is somebody who's a public figure and has the qualities and experience. But I have to say, I heard the other night from the great and the good within the university that they're saying they want somebody with deep pockets to be chancellor. And I think if that's the case, then the university needs to be honest. And instead of looking for a chancellor, perhaps they should be looking for a chief fundraising officer, change the title, and instead of having an election, have an auction. Because, it shouldn't just be about
chancellorship.
Yeah, it should just not be about deep pockets. I mean, as I said, the Constitution is very specific about the role of the Chancellor. They're there to be an independent body in certain dispute resolutions, to hold the officers to account when it comes to performing their duties, actually, and to be as an advocate for the university more widely.
So this is intriguing. What's it like as an outsider coming in to campaign for the Chancellor? What have you found out about Cambridge, perhaps, that you didn't know before you started your campaign?
Well, I found out that some of the fears I had are probably deeper than I thought. There was always going to be a level of misogyny in academia. But I know that, for example, and I won't say who, but one of the other candidates has said that if the other female candidate or myself won the chancellorship, then they might as well pack up and go home because it will become a reality show. It's just extraordinary, the level of misogyny. But I'm also hearing that on a very serious level from women at the university, from very many different diverse groups who are saying that they're very dissatisfied and unimpressed with the policies when it comes to how harassment is handled, how discrimination and sexism is handled at the university. So there does need to be a huge push to improve the governance and transparency.
Brilliant. Well, let's change tack slightly, because you are an incredible campaigner. You went through hell campaigning against Brexit. You've got a huge amount of abuse, but you kept going, and then you started your own political party. We've got the former Labour MP, now independent, Zara Sultana, announcing that she's starting a political party with or without Jeremy Corbyn. We're not quite clear. Have you got any advice for her about what it's like to start a political party and try and make your mark?
Well, it's quite interesting, because I think Ben Habib has also announced a couple of days ago that the Who Left Reform, that he's also launching a new party.
Know that.
So there's a flurry of new parties. I think what it shows is, and I'd say is, the principle of wanting to fill the hole of the dissatisfaction that voters are feeling is really important. But the thing you will find is that funding is so important and so difficult when you're a new party, and then the administrative burden that you have to then apply. But then there are really practical barriers. For example, we got debanked from nearly every single high street bank. Then trying to get, your insurance, and everyone comes at you because you're suddenly a politically exposed person. So there's real practical implications that impact you in a very negative way. And then there's all the abuse that comes, and you, as a new party, you don't have the same infrastructure and you don't have the same grassroots forces and organisations. So it is difficult. But the thing that we tried to do at the True and Fair Party that did not work is, I was adamant that we were not going to do negative politics, that we were just going to talk positively. And I'm afraid that's not quite how politics works on the ground. Trying to run a purely positive campaign is really hard.
That's very depressing to hear. Now, if you don't become Chancellor of Cambridge, are you done with politics?
Well, I've always seen politics with a small p rather than particularly a big P. And I've been a campaigner for 30 years, working on things from modern day slavery to cleaning up financial services. So I'm not stopping. One of the things I'm actually working on at the moment is to reform Section 24 of the Divorce Act, so that there's economic abuse, because I'm a survivor of domestic violence. Economic abuse is actually fairly treated in the divorce law.
Excellent. Well, Gina Miller, thank you so much for coming on the show. That's the campaigner Gina Miller, businesswoman turned anti-Brexit campaigner, who is campaigning now to become Chancellor of the University of Cambridge. Now, the broadcaster Jo Coburn is the latest big name to join the Times at 1, and she's back with us